Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today, A Proven Approach to Driving IT Operational Effectiveness and Efficiency. My name is Nick Wilson and I'll be helping to facilitate today's session. I have a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started. We will be addressing questions at the end of the webinar. To ask a question, please enter it into the chat box of your GoToWebinar panel, typically on the right-hand side of your screen. We will get to as many of the questions as we can. For those that we can't, we'll make sure that we follow up afterwards as well. We will also be sharing a recording of today's session after the webinar, so please do be mindful of an email after the webinar in the next day or so. With those things being said, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our distinguished presenter, Brett Scott. Brett.
Hello, my name is Brett Scott. Thank you, Nick, for the introduction. I would like to spend a little time today talking about as it said in our title here, driving IT operational effectiveness and efficiency. And the focus really is on IT operations and improving IT operations. So with that, we'll get started here in the next slide, which is going to show us a little bit about what we've heard. So we are trying to, by working with many clients, trying to better understand what the needs are of various IT leaders and what they're dealing with. Putting ourselves in their shoes, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But what we were able to find through a recent State of the CIO survey is that 47% of IT leaders are spending time aligning IT initiatives with business goals. And what that really means is, the importance today is that the IT organization in itself is seen as the group that is the enabler of the business making a profit. So it's really around what can IT do to help meet the business goals. And so we see a much more of a focus on that aspect of IT than what was perhaps in the past. And in recent times now, there's got to be this alignment, a clear alignment between what the business is looking for and what IT is delivering to the business. And so we're seeing IT leaders spending quite a bit of time on that. Secondly, we find that this survey found that 42% of IT leaders are spending time improving IT operations and system performance. So exactly what we're here to talk about today, what we're able to do to help and assist in your driving out the proper improvements at the right time to your IT operations to meet the needs of the business. And so we'll be focusing on that throughout this presentation, and hopefully that's why you joined today, because that's an area that you see a need and have an interest in focusing on. Additionally, 43% of IT leaders who have expanding roles at their companies are adding new responsibilities in operations. And what this really is all about is that, the line between the business and between IT is evaporating, and that in itself is creating new responsibilities for the IT leaders and for the IT teams in general. And so this is something that I'm sure you're all very much aware of, and this is something that's happening across industry and across the board. So with that line kind of evaporating between IT and the business, the IT leaders need to have much more of a business sense and much more of a business acumen and be more in tune with what the business is looking for. So a lot like what we talked about in the first bullet, this is about the new responsibilities that have been added to you and your operations. And then fourthly, here the 40% of IT leaders indicate increasing operational efficiency as a top initiative driving investments. So what we're saying here is that the money is being spent on increasing operational efficiency, and so driving that efficiency is an important part of what we do. It needs to be an important aspect that we remain focused on, and that's difficult to do in this world today where our IT operations are probably very thin due to budget cuts that are happening, industry-wide across all enterprises. There's budget cuts and therefore a reduction in staff, and so you're being asked to do more with less. And with everybody in that kind of state of affair, to increase your operational efficiency at the same time that you keep the lights on is a very difficult endeavor. And so at times there's a need for some assistance to bring about the kind of progress that you'd like to see on our operational efficiency that you'd want to get out of your investment dollars. So what we'd like to do is be able to offer some suggestions on how to go about this, and also offer up our assistance in doing so. And so with that, I'll go on to the next slide. What CEI does in this space is really to help all of our clients achieve far more out of their IT operations. And the way we do this, we tap into, strategic thinking and techniques that we have built into the expertise that we brought into the CEI team. I'm very proud of the CEI team that we have here, and the type of strategic thinking that comes from this group. We also would be looking to drive cost savings while streamlining your operations. And the experience that we bring to the table from a multiple of industries, I think will bring benefit to you. For example, I myself, who lead up this practice, this IT excellence practice for our CEI company, I come with a background. I've been here for 5 years at CEI, but I spent my last 15 years prior to that as a partner over at Accenture. And so I've interacted with many, many large clients through that time. And plus, I also served for nearly 3 years in a role at Accenture as the global IT director for the BPO business, which made up about 50% of Accenture. And so I've been in your shoes as an IT leader, whether you're a CIO or an IT director or whatever role you have as an IT leader. I've kind of stood in those shoes, and so I know the challenges, and I also know, the pain points and what it takes to be successful as an IT leader. And so I'd like to be able to, share that knowledge and share that thought leadership and some of the strategic thinking with our clients and help them and assist them however we can. And so that kind of experience, along with the team that I've built around me, are able to really make a difference in this area. And what we do when we come out and bring our experience to bear, we begin with an assessment of your current IT operations, and we identify what kind of strategic and value-add initiatives that you have already uncovered as important initiatives to press forward with, but perhaps they haven't been progressed to completion. And we're finding this, as I mentioned earlier, with the reduction in staff. We're finding that most companies have a pretty good idea of the improvements that are needed, but are unable to follow through to completion because everyone's so busy and heads down with their normal work. And so sometimes all they need is a little bit of assistance to help focus people in the right way to progress things and get them across the line so that the improvement actually takes effect and the business starts to take notice of it. And that's what we find at many of our clients. A second area that we get involved in is new areas for strategic improvement that are not previously identified by yourself. And so through our efforts in the assessment that we would do, we identify and recommend to you as IT leadership variety of recommendations of strategic improvement initiatives that you can consider whether you want to press forward with or not. All of these initiatives, both ones that were previously identified by your company as well as the ones identified by us, are pulled together and prioritized based on urgency, difficulty, and value. And then from there, we develop that into a strategic roadmap that can be executed upon to deliver the improvement that you're looking for across your operations. So this is really about taking a look at your entire enterprise, the IT and the business side, and pulling out a strategic roadmap that will allow you to execute the improvements that are necessary. This is our focus. To give you a little bit more detail as to how we go about this, there are several deliverables that this IT excellence strategy consists of. And so we bring the experience that we have to bear to help bring about maturity in your operations. And so what we do is we go through some focused interviews with IT and business leadership. So this isn't an extensive number of interviews, but it is interviews with the right IT leaders, usually the direct reports to the IT director, as well as the IT director himself or herself. And we would do those interviews, as well as interviews with various business leaders who have a especially intense relationship with IT. So those that really interact a lot with the IT group are the business leaders that we'd like to speak to and make sure that we understand from them what is most important and where improvement is needed and what they're actually looking for so that those expectations can be met. And so we go about doing those interviews, as well as we take a look at the evaluation of your current processes and tools. And so what we find is that usually the tools that you've already chosen are tools that could be utilized to do a lot more than you're currently using those tools for. And so we're tool agnostic. We're not out to sell any particular tool. And most of the companies that we deal with, in fact, we end up using the tools that they already have purchased and have in use, but we just find that they've been fully extensively underutilized. And so we're able to find ways to use the current tool set that you have to bring about better and more improved results, more automation, and better reporting, et cetera. So this total assessment is performed across these interviews, as well as the evaluation of your tools and processes. And coming out of the assessment, we come up with a comprehensive set of kind of strategic IT improvement initiatives that are that we develop, document, and then prioritize. All these, as we mentioned earlier, are prioritized based on urgency. So how quickly these are needed within your organization specifically, how difficult they would be to implement, and thirdly, how much value they would bring to the full enterprise and a full organization at your company. So again, these three things are very important to try to find out which are the low-hanging fruit. Some things that have a very low difficulty but a high urgency are things you want to tend to hit right off the bat and try to get implemented as soon as possible. And so we do that prioritization for you based on those things that we learned from the interviews that we've had. And then thirdly, the next deliverable is really taking all those recommendations that have been prioritized and building them into a custom strategic roadmap. That roadmap is really just a scheduled, executable approach to driving the immediate value to IT. So what we were looking for here is the timeline of the various initiatives and recommendations, which ones will be done in parallel, which ones will start here and when and end at another time, which ones have to be done in series because they rely on as a prerequisite to have something else completed first. And we lay that all out in a single approach that tells you that if you execute on this set of recommendations in the order that we present them on based on the prioritization, you'll bring the most value to your overall organization and to the overall business. And so that strategic roadmap is a great thing for you to use. And there's multiple ways this can be done. You can do this as something that you want to take that roadmap and execute on it yourself. Most of the companies that we work with actually ask for some assistance from us in driving and leading the execution, but they use their own internal teams to execute. Another option is to have CEI come in with the team and actually, implement and execute the full approach. So you can kind of go, one way or the other there and use as much or as little of our assistance as you feel necessary to drive out that roadmap. And then fourthly, we would deliver ongoing status reporting on a regular weekly basis. You'll know exactly what we're working on in terms of the assessment and then in terms of the execution of that assessment. And a little bit on a later slide, I'll show a little bit more about what that status reporting would look like. So with that, we'll continue to move on in the interest of time. What we typically assess, and the reason I put this slide together is just to give you an idea. This is going to be different for each company as to what we focus on primarily, but typically we're going to assess the various operational areas within IT. So things that are familiar to you, such as your service desk, your infrastructure group, your application management team, your ERP team, if you have an ERP that you have that you are running yourself, your database team, enterprise architecture, security. We'll look at each and every one of these organizations and focus on what we can do to improve the operations in these various areas. So one company may have a very extreme focus on application management, whereas another might say it's our service desk that needs primarily the most help. Wherever you direct us, we can spend a little extra time on those areas. And then on the other side of the page are the actual, activities or processes within these organizations that we definitely want to take a look at, because there's such a huge benefit to be gained by doing proper resource planning. We find that a lot of companies don't have a good plan in place for doing resource planning, demand management, capacity management. Those three together kind of work and hand in hand, and we're able to show ways to improve that so that we understand what resources we have, and we're planning out the use of those resources with the proper activities, and we understand what our capacity is as a group, and we're able to match that up with the demand that comes from the business and communicate, and maybe most importantly, to be able to communicate to the business what our capacity is, what we're truly able to handle, and give the business the expectation that we're not just a black hole that everything goes into, which many times IT is viewed that way, that we as a business send in our requests to the IT organization, and it seems like a black hole. We don't know when things will be done or when they'll come back. Where if you do proper resource capacity and demand planning, you can match up the capacity that you currently have and communicate exactly to the business so that they have a set expectation that this will be done in the next 2 months, or this won't be done in the next 2 months because of the capacity that we're currently dealing with that can't be changed. And so therefore your expectations might have to adjust as a business to understand when things will be done, but at least you understand that, and there seems to be less frustration when you come away from that. We also look at the onboarding and offboarding. Many times broken onboarding and offboarding process leads to not only security problems and issues, but also takes up a large amount of the time that your IT groups spend. And so if you can streamline that operation, you generally are able to save a lot of time and a lot of cost. Change management, another area we look at. Prioritization, as we mentioned earlier, reporting, and communications. We'll look at all these areas that are, primary areas that we investigate and primary areas where we find ways to improve. And there'll be time at the end to ask questions or even use the chat, as Nick had mentioned, during the presentation, so that I can address any questions you may have when we get to the end. This next slide is an example just showing how we prioritize. So just to kind of pull back the curtain to let you see, what we use as a framework for prioritizing. We generally use a 4-quadrant bubble chart, and what we do is we evaluate the urgency, whether the urgency is high or low or in between, and for this particular initiative, based on what we are hearing from you as a business. We also then will evaluate, and this is primarily based on our own view of what it would take to do this particular improvement that we're talking about, and determine if it's easy or if it's hard or extremely hard, and graph that on this chart. And then the third quadrant, besides the X and Y axis, is the value of the particular initiative, and the values marked on here by the size of the bubble. The larger the bubble, the more value that's going to be gained by the particular initiative being implemented. And so what we do is we draw a circle like the green circle, where we look at those areas in that bottom left-hand quadrant are the low-hanging fruit that's ripe to be able to be worked on, because it's low difficulty. It'll be quick to implement and very easy to implement, not difficult. And the priority is high. So if you have high priority, easy to implement improvements, that's obviously the low-hanging fruit that you should tackle first. And then in that, you notice that the majority of those also had high value, and we find that to be the case in most organizations. And so we circle that green group, and we knock those off as the top priority items that we work on. And then as we move on, we just draw the circle a little larger, and we start to take into account some of those initiatives that you see on there that are of a higher difficulty, but still very, very urgent to the business. And again, you see kind of a big grouping of large circles in that area as well in the top left-hand quadrant. And then some additional initiatives that perhaps are a little less on the priority scale, but still important and of high value. And so that circle takes into account all of that, and we move out there and say that's our next level of priority. That's not to say we forget about the ones that fall outside that circle. It's just that they're definitely prioritized later in the process. And so we take those last ones that you see outside of both circles. And you see that many of those also have a high value. And so what we do is we say, okay, these might be very difficult to implement and may not be as high of a priority, but they do bring a lot of value. And so we do prioritize those lower on the list, but we do tackle them and get those done. So this is something that we find works very well to help us organize what order we would do things in. This next example is really one of the status reporting that we do. And so this particular example, we worked with the CIO and IT director and their direct reports at a product company, and we identified 63 potential improvements. Now, that's a large number of improvements, and what we did was we looked at those, presented them to the leadership, and through some various conversations, we were able to deliberate on these, and we determined that 9 of these improvements were really decided to be not something that we would progress with at this time for a variety of reasons. And so this is a great time to do that type of an effort, because the initiatives that you remove will reduce the distraction of the business, of the IT organization on the improvements, reduce the distraction of unwanted or unnecessary improvements, and focus you on the right improvements. And so we find that it's very positive that there are improvements that we recommend that are indeed determined to be removed. That just gets us more, focused and less distracted. So of the remaining 54 improvements, then we begin to establish those into groups A through F or A through whatever in a priority order to accomplish. And then we'll provide a summary status on a weekly basis that shows how many of these improvements have been completed so far, which ones and how many are in progress, those that haven't been started, and then the improvements that are officially on hold. So we find that as we start to work through this, there may be a variety of reasons why a particular initiative, the timing isn't right, even though it may appear to be something we should be working on as, prioritized in group C, for instance. But it turns out that there's a couple of other prerequisites or some other things that really can't be done at this time. And so we put it on hold and do it later toward the end of the effort. And then we also organize each of the improvements into those that are process related, technology related, and people related, just so you can keep track of what types of changes we're doing. And generally there's a larger group of process related improvements, and then technology and people come in after that. This next slide is just showing basically a testimonial from one of our clients, Vitamix, that we did some work with over the past several months. They actually had a tremendous interest in improving their service desk specifically. So while we've been doing a lot of improvements across all of IT, this particular gentleman, the director of IT at Vitamix, has indicated that the service desk improvement that we did had a huge impact. And I think the key statement in this is that the maturity level of the service desk was indeed confirmed by the end user community across the company. So everyone that we talked to after we had been involved in doing the improvements for several months at Vitamix, everyone we talked to in the business, was the end users were sharing with us that they saw a tremendous maturity change, like night and day, on the service desk from what it was several months ago before we got involved in this and afterwards. And so that tells us that we did the right thing in terms of improvements. We organized them properly, and we were able to drive maturity up, and it was noticeable to the business. And this is what your end goal is, and that's why I include that testimonial. With that, I would just like to kind of end with, the way we would go about engaging with you if you were to decide to want to speak to us about this. We're very flexible on how we do this, but what we normally start off with is just a discussion with you as an IT leader to see what your challenges, your main challenges, your main pain points are, and any IT initiatives, that you already had in mind or that the business has in mind, and understand the context of where you stand. And based on that conversation, we'll come away with an idea as to whether we really can step in and assist or whether we can't. And the next step would be what I call a no risk, low cost short-term assessment. So When I say short term, I'm talking about a matter of weeks. Generally, these are done in the 2-week time frame. It could be a little bit longer. It could be a little shorter if depending on what's required. But generally, it's about a 2-week effort where we come in and do what we talked about earlier, those interviews with your IT leaders as well as the interviews with the business, and where we evaluate your processes and tools. And so we do this over a 2-week period, very, very quick, small investment required and really no risk, because all we're bringing back to you is producing an initial set of recommendations. And you can take a look at those recommendations and make a determination as to whether this looks like something that is of interest to you, that's going to bring value. And if so, we can develop it into a full-blown IT roadmap. And then you can make a determination whether you want us to help you and assist in driving the executable IT roadmap, or whether you want to take it on your own and try to work that into your current lights on operations and execute that yourself, or if you would like to have the assistance of one of our people or myself to actually lead the effort at executing that plan, utilizing your own people. And you can look at those various options, and we're very flexible to work with you. So what comes out of this, and the reason I say no risk, is because you've spent a very small amount of money and came out with a great set of recommendations, prioritized, that you can then ask to have developed into a full roadmap. If they look applicable, we can remove the ones that don't look to be applicable and press forward from there. So it's a great opportunity to work together, and just having an initial discussion would be a way to determine if there's some benefit that could be gained by working with us. So I thank you for your time today, for joining us, and I look forward to answering any of your questions here at the end.
Hey, Brett, thank you very much. We do have 2 questions that came through. The first one is, can you share any specific operation improvement initiatives that have proven effective and successful at some of your clients?
Yes, I can. One thing that we find to be that's repeatable across a variety of companies that we've been able to help is something that I think is relatively simple, but something that seems to be needed across many industries. And this is the prioritization of the work that you're doing for the business. And so we find that many companies have just taken in all the requests and working them as a group, trying to get as much done as they can in a short period of time. But the expectations with the business aren't being set in terms of what is the priority order based on your capacity. And so what we built for many companies, and matter of fact, the testimonial that we talked about earlier at Vitamix is one very recent example where we built a mechanism by which we could share the prioritized list, the prioritization of the input of work. And we did that using a tool that they currently used. So you can use your ServiceNow or Jira or whatever the tool is of choice that you use. And we build into it a prioritization mechanism so that the business can begin to tell us as an IT organization what is most important to them to get done out of the whole group of requests that are coming in. And we're able to track that in a tool so that everybody is aware of that. So everybody that's doing estimating or planning is able to see what the priorities are. And we then actually go a step further and make sure that there's a prioritization, not just from a individual business, but the overall business is looking at all the requests and saying, these are the ones that are the most priority. So the squeaky wheel doesn't get all of the attention. We actually have a group that oversees the overall prioritization. And this, with the business working together with IT, we tend to see, a much happier group of business leaders as they understand exactly when things will be done, if that makes sense. Any other questions there, Nick?
Yeah, we do have one more, Brett. Do you bring a team to execute the various initiatives, or would we as the client use our staff to implement and execute the initiatives?
Okay, yeah, I addressed some of that in the conversation, but we definitely are flexible to do it either way. So, and we've done it both ways. We have come up with a set of recommendations and a roadmap that a company chooses to execute on themselves. That brought value to them, and they were able to have something to work with, and it organized their thoughts and got something in place that they're able to work with. But we also will go as far as bringing a whole team of people together if needed, a small team, that could come in and actually execute the full roadmap from end to end. And then anything in between there, I mentioned we're flexible, and it's truly we are, because we're there to do what makes the most sense for you as a business. And if you really want more or less a project manager or someone to run and lead the execution of that roadmap, we find that's probably the most common approach, and one that you may be interested in, to have somebody that isn't involved in the heads down, day-to-day, keep the lights on efforts that everybody's so busy with their current work. If you don't have somebody that's overseeing it from a third party that can actually drive it, it tends that things don't get done. But if you have somebody driving it and can work well with your teams, which we find that our resources can come in and gain a lot of trust with your organization, and then that your organization is willing to work with us in making sure that they spend time executing these initiatives and they see the results of the maturity that it brings about, there's generally a very good uptake. And so, having one of our resources or two of our resources involved sometimes can be a real big benefit. So again, we're flexible and we can discuss that at any time.
All right. So Brett, we don't have any more questions at this point. Do you have any parting thoughts for the audience before we close down the webinar?
No, other than just to say that I hope that this was useful and gives you something to think about in terms of the importance of driving operational improvement across your IT operations and across your business as an enterprise. And so with that, I thank you for your time and for sitting in on this presentation, and look forward to speaking to you anytime.
Thanks so much, Brett. And as a reminder, we will send out a recording of the webinar within the next day. And to echo Brett's comments, we do appreciate your time and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.